Thank you very much, Sam, and I want to welcome everyone to today's session. Reg E versus MasterCard. It's a frustrating thing, and what we're going to look at in detail today is those situations where Reg E says this is what you have to do for your customer. But then on the other hand, you have MasterCard saying, well, yes, you need to do this for the customer, but we need all of these details. And we have situations that arise where we may not be able to work through MasterCard the way that we would like to, and unfortunately Reg E is still going to require that we conduct our investigation, assist the customer, provide provisional credit, and it leaves us wondering, scratching our heads, what do we do? And in some cases we're asking, do we have to help the customer? Does Reg E even cover their situation? And if it doesn't, what does MasterCard say we have to do? So I don't want you to see the verses in the title and think that that means we're going to have a winner or a loser today. All that means is we're going to compare the two rules. We're going to see how we can comply with both, because we have, on the one hand, our regulatory obligation to comply with Reg E so that our auditors and our examiners don't come down on us and have issues there. And on the other hand, as MasterCard issuers, we have a contractual obligation to follow what MasterCard has to say. And so we're going to try to marry these two conflicting sets of rules that we're required to follow and try to do a couple of things. One, we want to protect our bottom line as best as we can, but we want to help the customer. And so for our agenda today, we're going to start off with that comparison. MasterCard, Reg E. What does one say that you have to do? What does the other say that you have to do? How do you comply with both when there's disagreement? We're also going to touch base on business debit cards, which, as one questioner has already pointed out, business cards aren't covered by Reg E, but what does MasterCard say about it? And so we're going to touch base on that. Zero liability, which is a big source of frustration because in many cases the customer is getting fully reimbursed and the bank is taking the full loss. And so we're going to touch base on when that applies, but we also want to look at the exclusions to zero liability so that we can see there are some times where we can say to the customer, I'm sorry, zero liability is not going to help you. We're going to look at the chargeback stages. It's very important to know how do we go through the MasterCard process, because in many instances we are using the chargeback as the primary way of investigating a Reg E claim. And if we do that incorrectly, if we're not filing the correct chargeback codes, if we're not getting the correct information, then that can sabotage our investigation and lead us to a situation where we have to pay out on a Reg E claim solely because we don't have enough information to make a determination about whether or not the charge was legitimate or not. Definitely case studies. One of the best ways to learn is by example. And so we're going to look at some specific examples that I've run across, some of them kind of entertaining, I hope, for you, and just to kind of help you see how all of this gets applied in the real world. We'll finish up with compliance, which I will confess I have used exactly twice in my 10 years of experience working with debit cards. But it's still good to know that it's there, when you can use it, when it can help you to avoid a loss, and so we'll touch base on that. We will want to take a 5-minute break in the middle because otherwise everyone's head will explode. We don't want to do that. So to kick off today, we're going to go right into our issuer responsibilities. This is what MasterCard says. These are pillars that they say you have to, as an issuer, do for your customer and handle the way you manage your program. And the first one is honor all transactions. Essentially what this means is you get your settlement file from your card processor every day, and occasionally you're going to have some of those transactions reject. They might be because the account is now overdrawn, could be because the account's closed, could be because the card was expired. Whatever the case might be, something's gone wrong and the transaction kicks out. We as an issuer are then responsible for trying to find a way to post these transactions to our customer's account. Unlike an ACH item, unlike a check, we can't simply just kick them back with our NSF items to the Fed. MasterCard is saying you've got to try to post these. When we get to the chargeback stages, we'll talk about some situations where despite our best efforts, we can't post a charge. What do we do then? Are we stuck eating the loss? Or what are the restitution opportunities that MasterCard has for us in the chargeback process? We're also required to assist our customers, and we're going to talk about several situations where Reg E does apply, but we are also going to talk about several where it does not. And the temptation there is to say, oh, Reg E doesn't apply. This situation is totally between you and the merchant. The issuing institution refuses to get involved. MasterCard says you cannot do that. If a cardholder has a valid claim and it's a situation that is covered by a chargeback right, we are obligated to do whatever we can to assist the customer in resolving the dispute. And lastly, prevent unjust enrichment. And there's really two prongs to unjust enrichment. The first is for the cardholder. Many times it may come up where cardholder files a claim, we provide provisional credit, and then after we've closed our investigation, we see that the merchant has also refunded the cardholder. And of course, then they want the money from the chargeback back from us. The question then is, are we allowed to debit the customer after we have issued final credit to them? And thankfully, the answer to that is yes. You never want to say that you're revoking provisional credit after it's been made final, because the regulation says you can't do that. But under unjust enrichment clauses, you can say, oh, we see your account was credited twice. One of those is a duplicate. We're going to debit your account for the duplicate credit, and that's okay. The cardholder is not allowed to profit through the chargeback process. But similarly, the bank is not allowed to profit through the chargeback process. Occasionally the question will come up, well, hey, I look at Reg E, and the Reg E says the customer's liable for $50. Now, suppose that the institution files a chargeback on a $200 charge, and they win the chargeback. They get the full $200 back. The bank is not allowed to credit the cardholder $150 and keep $50 for themselves to try to offset other losses. That would be considered unjust enrichment to the bank. If you recover $200 of the cardholder's money from a dispute, you give the cardholder $200. Now, as we look at our MasterCard versus Reg E coverage, we're going to start with what does Reg E define as an error? And if you go to the top of page 4 of your materials, you're going to see I have in italics what Reg E considers an error. And the bulk of our conversation is going to go looking at those first three. An unauthorized electronic funds transfer. So this is the customer said, I didn't do this transaction. Could be fraud, could be family member. We'll touch on some of those situations. Secondly is an incorrect electronic funds transfer. And this could be something such as, I authorized $10, but I was charged $20. So it was incorrect. One of the early questions that we received asked about transaction dates. And I wasn't completely clear on the question, but I'm assuming that on your dispute form, you had something that says that where the customer can assert, I authorized the transaction to come out of my account today the 2nd, and they actually charged me on September 25th. And the question was, does Reg E cover that? The answer is yes. This would be considered an incorrect electronic funds transfer. The problem that we're going to run into, and I'm going to jump ahead to the chargebacks just a little bit, is I can guarantee, although Reg E covers that type of a claim, you're never going to win a chargeback filing for incorrect date, because MasterCard is going to look at that and say, well, the customer authorized the charge, they received benefit for the charge, so no, we're not going to honor that chargeback claim. What does this mean for your institution? The way I usually will handle these, if I have a customer that comes in and says I was charged early, I'll ask them two questions. Did you authorize the charge? Yes. Did you authorize it, but the date is in the future? Yes. The way I will handle this is I will provisionally credit the cardholder for the amount of the dispute. I will refund any fees that their card was charged, or their account was charged because the charge posted early. But then I want them to tell me what date was that authorized. And then when that date rolls around, I'm debiting the provisional credit at that point. I'm not filing a chargeback. I'm not bothering to contact the merchant.